Before we dive into this story that will completely change how you see workplace dynamics, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. And if this story resonates with you, drop a like and share it with someone who needs to hear this. My name is Marcus, and what I'm about to tell you happened 3 months ago in downtown Chicago. If you think you know how this story ends, I promise you, you don't. The morning air was crisp as I walked through the glass doors of Sterling and Associates, one of Chicago's most prestigious marketing firms. The lobby's marble floors reflected the autumn sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, and the familiar hum of the city's rush-hour traffic created a constant backdrop. I'd been working here for 2 years, and despite my dedication, I remained what most people would call invisible. My cubicle sat in the middle of the open-plan office, surrounded by the constant chatter of my colleagues. The space smelled of fresh coffee and the faint scent of someone's expensive perfume, probably Jessica's. Jessica Martinez was everything I wasn't: confident, outgoing, and seemingly effortless in her success. Her desk, positioned near the corner office with a partial view of Lake Michigan, was always immaculate, adorned with awards and thank you notes from clients. I had harbored feelings for Jessica for months, not just because of her striking appearance, her dark hair always perfectly styled, her professional attire that somehow looked both authoritative and approachable, but because of the way she handled herself in meetings. She had this ability to command attention without demanding it, to make complex ideas sound simple and elegant. That Tuesday morning, I decided it was finally time. I had rehearsed the words 100 times in my head, practiced in front of my bathroom mirror until my reflection looked as tired of hearing it as I felt saying it. The plan was simple. Ask her to lunch, somewhere nice, but not presumptuous. Maybe that new bistro on Michigan Avenue that everyone had been talking about. The office was buzzing with its usual energy. Sarah from accounting was discussing her weekend plans near the water cooler, her voice carrying across the room as she described a disastrous date that had everyone within earshot chuckling. The sales team was huddled around Tom's desk, analyzing quarterly projections on his dual monitors, their faces illuminated by the blue glow of spreadsheets and charts. I found Jessica near the break room, pouring herself a cup of coffee from the expensive machine the company had installed last month. She was wearing a navy blazer that complemented her complexion, and she seemed to be in a good mood, humming softly to herself. This felt like the perfect moment. "Hey, Jessica," I said, my voice slightly higher than intended. "I was wondering if you'd like to grab lunch today. There's this new place on Michigan Avenue that's supposed to have incredible—" She turned around, and for a moment I thought I saw surprise in her eyes. But then something shifted. Her expression changed, and she glanced over my shoulder. I followed her gaze and realized that several of our colleagues had unconsciously gathered nearby. Sarah had moved closer from the water cooler, Tom and his team had looked up from their huddle, and even Mr. Henderson from HR had paused his conversation with one of the interns. What happened next felt like it occurred in slow motion, yet was over in seconds. Jessica began to laugh. Not a polite, uncomfortable giggle, but a full, hearty laugh that seemed to bubble up from somewhere deep inside her. Her head tilted back slightly, and she covered her mouth with her free hand, but the laughter continued to spill out between her fingers. "Oh my God, Marcus," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Are you seriously asking me out right now?" The laughter intensified, and she looked around at our colleagues, as if inviting them to share in the absurdity of the moment. "I mean, I'm flattered, really, but—" She paused, struggling to contain her amusement. "We're just in completely different leagues, you know?" The break room had gone silent, except for the gentle hum of the coffee machine and the distant sound of traffic from the street below. I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks, could sense the eyes of my colleagues boring into me. Sarah had stopped mid-sentence in her conversation. Tom's team had gone completely quiet, and even the usual clicking of keyboards from the nearby cubicles seemed to have ceased. "I mean, look at you," Jessica continued, her laughter finally subsiding, but her voice still carrying a note of amused disbelief. "And then look at me. We're on different levels, professionally, socially." She trailed off, shaking her head with what appeared to be genuine bewilderment. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear my own heartbeat, could feel the familiar weight of humiliation settling in my chest like a stone. But then, something unexpected happened. Instead of the usual spiral of self-doubt and retreat that typically followed such moments, I felt something else entirely, a strange sense of calm. I looked at Jessica, really looked at her, and saw something I had missed before. Beneath the confident exterior, beneath the perfect hair and the impressive awards, I saw someone who had just revealed something fundamental about herself. And in that moment, I realized that my feelings for her had been based on an illusion, a projection of qualities that I had wanted to see rather than what was actually there. The words that came out of my mouth next surprised even me. They weren't angry or bitter, weren't designed to hurt or embarrass her in return. They were simply honest, spoken with a clarity that I hadn't possessed just moments before. "You know what, Jessica?" I said, my voice steady and calm. "You're absolutely right. We are in different leagues." I paused, letting the words settle in the silent break room. "I'm in the league of people who would never laugh at someone for having the courage to be vulnerable. I'm in the league of people who understand that how you treat others when you think you have power over them says everything about who you really are." I could see her smile faltering, could see something shifting in her eyes as my words registered. "I've spent months thinking you were out of my league because of your success, your confidence, your achievements," I continued. "But I realize now that you're not out of my league. You're not even playing the same game, because the game I'm playing involves treating people with basic human dignity, and that's apparently not a game you're interested in." The break room was so quiet I could hear the ice maker cycling in the refrigerator. Jessica's face had gone pale, and she was staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Around us, our colleagues seemed frozen, as if they were witnessing something they knew they would remember for a long time. "So thank you," I said, "for saving me from making what would have been a terrible mistake, because now I know exactly who you are, and more importantly, I know exactly who I am. And I wouldn't change places with you for anything in the world." I turned and walked back to my cubicle, leaving Jessica standing alone by the coffee machine. The normal sounds of the office gradually resumed, keyboards clicking, phones ringing, conversations starting up again. But there was an underlying current of tension that hadn't been there before. What I didn't know at the time was that my words would set in motion a series of events that would completely transform not just my life, but Jessica's as well. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply tell the truth, especially when it's the last thing anyone expects to hear. As I sat down at my desk and turned on my computer, I caught a glimpse of Jessica out of the corner of my eye. She was still standing by the coffee machine, but she was no longer laughing. Instead, she was staring in my direction with an expression that looked almost like respect. But that was just the beginning of a story that would unfold in ways I never could have imagined. Because 3 days later, everything changed again. I spent the rest of that Tuesday trying to focus on work, but I could feel the lingering effects of the morning's encounter in every interaction. People seemed to be looking at me differently, not with pity, as I had expected, but with something that resembled admiration. Sarah from accounting stopped by my desk around lunchtime and quietly said, "Good for you, Marcus. That took guts." Tom nodded approvingly when he passed my cubicle, and even Mr. Henderson gave me what seemed like a respectful nod when we passed in the hallway. Jessica, on the other hand, seemed to be having a different experience entirely. I noticed her several times throughout the day, and each time she appeared more subdued than usual. Her typical confident stride seemed less assured, and she spent most of the afternoon at her desk rather than making her usual rounds through the office, chatting with colleagues and clients. The Chicago skyline outside our windows was beginning to glow with the warm colors of sunset when I finally packed up my things to leave. The office was quieter now, with most of the day shift heading home to their families and evening plans. As I waited for the elevator, I reflected on how dramatically the day had diverged from my expectations. I had planned to ask someone to lunch. Instead, I had discovered something important about both of us. Wednesday morning brought with it a crisp autumn chill that made me grateful for my warm coat as I walked from the L station to the office. The streets of downtown Chicago were alive with their usual energy. Food trucks setting up on corners, business professionals hurrying to meetings with their phones pressed to their ears, the distant sound of construction work mixing with the honking of traffic. When I arrived at Sterling and Associates, something felt different. The usual morning rhythm seemed slightly off, though I couldn't immediately identify why. It wasn't until I was settling in at my desk with my first cup of coffee that I noticed Jessica wasn't at hers. This was unusual. She was typically one of the first people in the office, often arriving before 7:30 a.m. to get a head start on her day. Around 10 a.m., she finally appeared, but she looked different somehow. Her usually impeccable appearance seemed slightly disheveled. Not in an obvious way, but in the small details that someone who had spent months observing her would notice. Her hair, while still professional, lacked its usual perfect styling. Her blazer, though expensive and well-fitted, seemed to sit differently on her shoulders, as if she were carrying some invisible weight. Throughout Wednesday and Thursday, I watched this transformation continue. Jessica, who had always been the center of social interactions in the office, seemed to be withdrawing. The easy confidence that had characterized her every movement appeared to be gradually dissolving. She still performed her job competently. Her client presentations remained polished. Her reports were still thorough and insightful. But the effortless charisma that had made her so magnetic was noticeably absent. Friday morning brought an unexpected development. I was reviewing quarterly marketing analytics when Jessica appeared at my cubicle. She stood there for a moment, seeming to gather herself before speaking. "Marcus," she said, her voice lacking its usual commanding tone. Could I talk to you for a few minutes, maybe in the conference room?" I looked up at her, surprised by both her presence and her demeanor. Gone was the woman who had laughed at me just 3 days earlier. In her place stood someone who seemed almost vulnerable, uncertain in a way I had never seen before. "Of course," I replied, saving my work and following her to the small conference room at the end of the hall. The conference room was one of the smaller meeting spaces, with an oval table that could seat about 8 people and windows that offered a view of the busy street below. Jessica closed the door behind us and took a seat across from me, her hands folded on the table. For a moment, neither of us spoke. "I owe you an apology," she said finally, her eyes fixed on her hands rather than on me. "What I did on Tuesday, how I treated you, it was inexcusable." I waited, sensing that she had more to say. "I've been thinking about what you said," she continued, finally looking up to meet my eyes. "About the different leagues we're in, about dignity and how I treat people. And you were right, completely right." She paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "I've spent so much of my career focused on building this image, on being seen as successful and untouchable, that I lost sight of basic human decency. When you asked me to lunch, my first instinct wasn't to consider your feelings or respond with kindness. It was to perform for our colleagues, to reinforce this persona I've created." The honesty in her voice was striking, so different from the polished confidence I was accustomed to hearing from her. "The truth is," she said, "I was flattered that you asked. You're one of the most genuine people in this office, and I've noticed how thoughtful you are, how you actually listen when people talk, how you go out of your way to help others, even when there's nothing in it for you. But instead of responding to that sincerity with honesty of my own, I chose cruelty. And I hate that about myself. I found myself studying her face, looking for signs of manipulation or performance, but found none. This seemed to be Jessica stripped of all pretense, speaking from a place of genuine regret. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she continued, "and I'm not telling you this because I want anything from you. I'm telling you because you deserved better than what I gave you, and because your words made me realize some things about myself that I needed to face." We sat in silence for a moment, the sounds of the busy office filtering through the conference room door. Finally, I spoke. "I appreciate you saying that, Jessica. It takes courage to acknowledge when we've hurt someone, and even more courage to examine our own motivations." She nodded, seeming relieved that I wasn't responding with anger or bitterness. "There's something else," she said. "I wanted you to know that I've been watching how people have been treating you since Tuesday, and I've seen something that I don't think you've fully realized yet." I raised an eyebrows, curious about where this was heading. "People respect you more now than they ever have," she said. "Not because you stood up to me, but because of how you stood up to me. You didn't attack me or try to tear me down. You just stated your values clearly and walked away with your dignity intact. That's actually pretty remarkable." As she spoke, I realized she was right about something I had been only dimly aware of. My interactions with colleagues over the past few days had been different, warmer, more genuine, marked by a respect that hadn't been there before. "I guess what I'm trying to say," Jessica concluded, "is that in trying to put you in your place, I accidentally showed everyone, including myself, exactly where your place really is. And it's higher than I ever gave you credit for." What happened next would prove to be the turning point, not just in our relationship, but in both of our careers. Because sometimes the most profound changes begin with the simplest acknowledgements of truth. The following Monday brought with it an unexpected email that would change everything I thought I knew about my position at Sterling and Associates. As I settled into my cubicle with my morning coffee, watching the early commuters hurry past on the sidewalk below, I noticed a message from David Sterling himself, the founding partner whose name was on the building directory. The email was brief. "Marcus, please see me in my office at 10 a.m. Best regards, David Sterling." My first instinct was panic. In 2 years at the company, I had never been summoned to the top floor, never had any direct contact with Sterling beyond the occasional company-wide email or holiday party greeting. As 10 a.m. approached, I found myself wondering if Jessica had complained about our interaction, if somehow my moment of honesty had been reframed as insubordination or workplace harassment. Sterling's office occupied a corner of the building's top floor, with panoramic views of Chicago's skyline and Lake Michigan beyond. The space was elegantly appointed, but not ostentatious. Expensive furniture that spoke of success without shouting it, bookshelves lined with industry publications and leadership texts, and walls decorated with awards and photos from charity events and company milestones. David Sterling was a man in his early 60s, with silver hair and the kind of presence that commanded attention without effort. He had built the company from nothing 25 years earlier, and his reputation in Chicago's business community was legendary. When I knocked on his door, he looked up from his computer and smiled warmly. "Marcus, come in, please. Have a seat." I settled into one of the leather chairs facing his desk, trying to project calm despite my racing heart. "I suppose you're wondering why I asked you here," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Let me start by saying that what happened last week in the break room has come to my attention." My stomach dropped. Here it was, the consequences I had been dreading. "Now, before you look like you're about to be sick," Sterling continued with a slight chuckle, "let me be clear about something. You're not in trouble. Quite the opposite, actually." I blinked, certain I had misheard him. "Marcus, in my 25 years running this company, I've learned that there are two types of people who succeed in business. The first type succeeds by being the smartest person in the room, by outmaneuvering competition, by playing politics better than everyone else. These people can be very successful, but they rarely inspire loyalty or build lasting relationships. He paused, looking out at the city skyline before continuing. The second type succeeds by being the kind of person others want to work with, to trust, to follow. They succeed because they understand that business, at its core, is about human relationships. And human relationships are built on respect, integrity, and authenticity. I remained silent, unsure where this conversation was heading. What you did last week, Sterling said, wasn't just standing up for yourself. It was demonstrating exactly the kind of character and leadership that this company needs more of. You handled a difficult situation with grace. You articulated your values clearly without attacking someone personally, and you walked away with your dignity intact. He opened a folder on his desk and pulled out what appeared to be a job description. "I've been looking for someone to head up our new client relations division," he said. "It's a role that requires someone who can build trust quickly, who can navigate difficult personalities, who can represent our company's values, even under pressure. Your salary would increase by 40%, you'd have your own office, and you'd be working directly with our most important clients." I stared at the paper he was sliding across the desk toward me, unable to process what I was hearing. "Mr. Sterling," I managed to say, "I appreciate this more than I can express, but I'm not sure I understand. How does one interaction in a break room qualify me for a leadership position?" Sterling smiled, the expression reaching his eyes in a way that made his face seem years younger. "Marcus, that interaction didn't qualify you for anything. It simply revealed what was already there. I've been watching you for months. The way you handle difficult clients, the way you support your colleagues, the way you consistently deliver quality work without drama or politics. What happened last week just confirmed what I already suspected. You have the kind of character that can't be taught." He leaned forward, his expression becoming more serious. "This company's success has always depended on our ability to build genuine relationships with our clients. They don't just want good marketing strategies. They want to work with people they trust, people who understand that their success is our success. You've already been doing that work informally. I'm just asking you to do it officially." As I sat there trying to absorb this unexpected turn of events, Sterling continued, "I won't lie to you. It won't be easy. You'll be dealing with demanding clients, high-pressure situations, and significant responsibility. But I believe you're ready for it. More importantly, I believe our clients will respond to your authenticity in ways that will benefit everyone." The offer was everything I had hoped for professionally, but had never dared to imagine could happen so quickly or in such an unexpected way. As I looked out at the Chicago skyline from Sterling's office windows, I realized that my life was about to change in ways I was just beginning to understand. "There's one more thing," Sterling said, his tone becoming slightly more somber. "This promotion will put you in a position of authority over some of your current colleagues, including Jessica Martinez. I want to make sure you're comfortable with that dynamic, given recent events." I thought about Jessica's apology, about the vulnerability she had shown in acknowledging her mistakes, about the respect I had seen in her eyes during our conversation in the conference room. "I think I can handle that," I said. "In fact, I think it might work out better than you'd expect." What I didn't know at the time was that this conversation was just the beginning of a transformation that would ultimately affect not just my career, but the entire culture of Sterling and Associates. Because sometimes standing up for your values doesn't just change how others see you, it changes how you see yourself and opens doors you never knew existed. But the real surprise was still to come, and it would involve Jessica in ways that none of us could have predicted. 3 weeks into my new role as Director of Client Relations, I was beginning to understand why David Sterling had been so confident in his decision. The work was challenging, managing relationships with Fortune 500 companies, navigating complex negotiations, leading a team of 12 people, but it felt natural in a way that surprised me. More importantly, the respect I had gained from that moment in the break room had translated into real leadership credibility with both my team and our clients. My new office was on the 15th floor, with a view of Grant Park and a glimpse of Lake Michigan beyond. The space still felt surreal, the mahogany desk, the bookshelf filled with industry publications, the conference table where I met with clients who controlled marketing budgets larger than most people's annual salaries. But what felt most significant was the way my colleagues interacted with me now. The invisible barriers that had once separated me from the company's inner circle had simply disappeared. Jessica had been professional and respectful since my promotion, but our interactions had been limited to necessary business communications. She reported to Tom Harrison now, who managed the creative team, so our paths didn't cross as frequently as they once had. When we did interact, she was cordial but reserved, as if she were still processing the dramatic shift in our respective positions. That changed on a Thursday afternoon in late November. Chicago was experiencing one of those perfect autumn days. Crisp air, brilliant sunshine, the kind of weather that made the city feel alive with possibility. I was reviewing client reports when my assistant informed me that Jessica was asking to see me. She appeared in my doorway a few minutes later, looking professional but somewhat nervous. She was wearing a charcoal grey suit that I remembered from her days of effortless confidence. But something in her posture suggested this conversation wouldn't be easy for her. "Hi, Marcus," she said. "Do you have a few minutes to talk?" "Of course," I replied, gesturing toward the chairs in front of my desk. "What's on your mind?" She sat down, crossing her legs and folding her hands in her lap in a gesture that seemed designed to contain whatever nervousness she was feeling. "I wanted to talk to you about the Morrison Industries account," she said. Morrison Industries was one of our largest clients, a manufacturing company with operations across the Midwest. They were also one of our most demanding accounts, known for last-minute changes, unrealistic deadlines, and executives who weren't shy about expressing their displeasure when things didn't go perfectly. "What about Morrison?" I asked. "Tom assigned me to lead the creative team for their upcoming campaign," she said. "It's a big opportunity, probably the largest project I've been given primary responsibility for, but—" She trailed off, seeming to struggle with whatever she wanted to say next. "But what?" I prompted gently. "But I'm terrified I'm going to mess it up," she said, the words coming out in a rush. Ever since our conversation in the break room, I've been questioning everything about how I approach my work, my relationships with colleagues, my interactions with clients. I used to be so confident, maybe overconfident, and now I second-guess every decision. This was not what I had expected to hear. The Jessica I had known for 2 years had never expressed doubt about anything, had never appeared vulnerable or uncertain. Yet here she was, asking for help with something that should have been routine for someone of her experience and skill level. "Jessica," I said carefully, "you're one of the most talented creative professionals in this company. Your campaigns have won awards, your clients consistently request to work with you specifically, and your presentation skills are exceptional. What makes you think you'd mess up Morrison?" She was quiet for a moment, looking out the window at the city below. "Because I realize now that a lot of my previous success was built on a persona that wasn't really me," she said finally. "I was so focused on appearing confident and untouchable that I never developed genuine relationships with my clients. I performed competence instead of actually being competent, if that makes sense." I found myself leaning forward, drawn in by her honesty. "When you called me out that day," she continued, "you made me realize that I had been treating people as props in my own professional theater, instead of as human beings with their own needs and feelings. And now that I'm trying to be more authentic, I feel like I don't know how to do my job anymore." The vulnerability in her voice was striking, so different from anything I had ever heard from her before. But what struck me even more was the insight she was demonstrating, the ability to recognize not just what she had done wrong, but why she had been doing it. "Jessica," I said, "what you're describing isn't a weakness, it's growth. The fact that you're questioning your old approach means you're evolving into a better professional, not a worse one." She looked at me with something that might have been hope. But what if the clients can tell that I'm different? What if they don't respond to this new version of me? I thought about my own recent experiences with clients, about how my authenticity had actually strengthened rather than weakened my professional relationships. "Can I tell you something?" I said. "In the 3 weeks since I started this new role, I've had more genuine breakthroughs with clients than I had in my previous 2 years here. And it's not because I suddenly became more skilled or knowledgeable. It's because I stopped trying to be what I thought they wanted and started being who I actually am." Jessica was listening intently now, her earlier nervousness replaced by focused attention. "Clients can sense authenticity," I continued. "They've been dealing with marketing professionals who perform confidence for so long that when they encounter someone who's genuinely confident, someone who's comfortable enough with themselves to admit when they don't know something, who's secure enough to ask questions, who cares more about finding the right solution than about looking smart, it's refreshing." "So you think I should just be myself?" she asked. "I think you should be the best version of yourself," I replied, "which, based on our conversation right now, is someone who's thoughtful, self-aware, honest about her limitations, and genuinely committed to doing right by her clients." What happened next surprised both of us. Jessica's eyes filled with tears, not the dramatic kind that come with emotional outbursts, but the quiet kind that accompany moments of real recognition and relief. "Thank you," she said quietly. I didn't realize how much I needed to hear that. As she prepared to leave my office, I made a decision that would prove to be one of the most important of my career. "Jessica," I said, "how would you feel about working together on the Morrison campaign?" She turned back, surprised. "What do you mean?" "I mean partnering with you," I said. "Client relations and creative working together from the ground up, building something that serves Morrison's needs while showcasing what both of our departments can accomplish when we collaborate authentically." The smile that spread across her face was unlike any expression I'd ever seen from her. Genuine, hopeful, and completely free of performance. "I would love that," she said. What neither of us knew at the time was that this collaboration would not only save the Morrison Industries account, but would also lay the foundation for something neither of us had been looking for, but both of us desperately needed. The Morrison Industries campaign became a turning point, not just for Jessica and me, but for the entire culture at Sterling & Associates. Working together, we discovered that our different strengths complemented each other in ways that created something entirely new. An approach that combined creative innovation with genuine relationship building, resulting in campaigns that didn't just meet client objectives, but exceeded them in ways that surprised everyone involved. Jessica's creative instincts, once freed from the pressure of maintaining a perfect facade, became more innovative and daring. She began proposing ideas that were bold but thoughtful, creative but grounded in real understanding of client needs. Meanwhile, my focus on authentic relationship building meant that clients felt heard and valued in ways they hadn't experienced before, making them more open to creative risks and more invested in our success. The Morrison campaign launch exceeded all expectations. Their CEO, a notoriously difficult man named Robert Morrison, who had fired 3 previous marketing firms, actually called David Sterling personally to praise our work. More importantly, he specifically mentioned the refreshing honesty and genuine collaboration he had experienced working with our team. Word of our success spread quickly through Chicago's business community. Within 2 months, we had 3 new major accounts, all of whom had specifically requested to work with the team that turned around Morrison Industries. David Sterling, recognizing the value of what we had created, officially restructured the company to formalize the collaboration between client relations and creative departments. But the most significant change wasn't professional, it was personal. Working closely with Jessica over those intense months, I discovered layers to her personality that I had never suspected. Beneath the polished exterior was someone who was genuinely funny, surprisingly thoughtful, and incredibly dedicated to doing right by others. She had a way of seeing problems from unexpected angles, of asking questions that revealed assumptions no one else had thought to examine. More importantly, she had learned to channel her natural charisma into something more substantial than mere performance. Her confidence now came from competence and genuine care for others, rather than from image management. She was still striking, still magnetic, but now these qualities served a purpose beyond self-promotion. Our working lunches became genuine conversations. Our late nights preparing presentations became opportunities to share stories about our backgrounds, our goals, our fears about the future. I learned that her polished exterior had been a defense mechanism, developed during a childhood spent moving between different cities as her father's military career progressed. She learned that my quiet nature had been shaped by growing up as the youngest of 4 children, where listening had been more valuable than speaking. The shift in our relationship was gradual, so subtle that neither of us could identify exactly when professional collaboration became something deeper. It might have been the evening we stayed until 10 p.m. fine-tuning the Morrison presentation, ordering Chinese food and discovering we both had strong opinions about science fiction novels. It might have been the morning she brought me coffee without being asked, somehow knowing exactly how I liked it prepared. It might have been the day she laughed at one of my dry observations about a particularly pompous client, and I realized I had been unconsciously trying to make her laugh for weeks. By spring, our colleagues had begun to notice. Not in an obvious way. We maintained strict professionalism during business hours, but in the small details that observant people pick up on. The way Jessica's face would light up when I entered a room. The way my voice would soften when I spoke to her. The way we seemed to communicate with glances during client meetings, understanding each other's thoughts without words. David Sterling, with his decades of experience reading people and situations, was probably the first to recognize what was happening. One afternoon in May, he asked me to stay after a leadership meeting. "Marcus," he said once the conference room had cleared, "I want to talk to you about something that's none of my business but affects the business nonetheless." And I waited, curious about where this was heading. "Your collaboration with Jessica has been extraordinary," he said. "The work you've produced together has elevated this entire company. But I'd be naive not to notice that your professional partnership seems to be evolving into something more personal." I felt heat rising in my cheeks, but Sterling held up a hand before I could respond. "I'm not criticizing," he said. "I'm actually impressed by how professionally you've both handled what must be a complicated situation. But I want to make sure you've thought through the potential challenges." "What kind of challenges?" I asked. "Office relationships can be tricky," he said, "especially when one person is in a position of authority over the other, even indirectly. I want to make sure both of you feel comfortable with the dynamic, and that neither of you feels pressure to compromise your professional judgment for personal reasons." I appreciated his directness, and realized he was giving me an opportunity to address something I had been thinking about for weeks. "Mr. Sterling," I said, "I want you to know that my professional judgment about Jessica is based entirely on her work performance, which has been exceptional. And my personal feelings for her have developed because of who she's revealed herself to be, not because of any professional considerations." Sterling nodded approvingly. "That's exactly what I hoped you'd say," he said. "And for what it's worth, I think you're both lucky to have found someone who brings out the best in your professional abilities, while also connecting with you personally." As summer approached, Jessica and I finally acknowledged what had been building between us for months. It happened on a Thursday evening in June as we walked along the lakefront after a particularly successful client dinner. The Chicago skyline was lit up against the darkening sky, and the lake breeze carried the sounds of the city and the gentle lapping of waves against the shore. "Marcus," she said, stopping suddenly and turning to face me, "I need to tell you something." "What's that?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew. "I think I'm falling in love with you," she said simply, "and I don't know what to do about it." I looked at her, this woman who had once laughed at me in front of our colleagues, who had unknowingly set in motion the chain of events that had transformed both our careers and our lives, and realized that everything had led to this moment. "I think I'm falling in love with you too," I replied, "and I think we figure it out together." Mal. What had begun with humiliation and ended with honesty had somehow become the foundation for something neither of us had been looking for, but both of us desperately needed. A partnership built on mutual respect, shared values, and the kind of authentic connection that transforms not just individual lives, but everything those lives touch. 6 months later, when Jessica and I announced our engagement at the company holiday party, the applause was genuine and enthusiastic, because sometimes the most profound transformations begin with the simplest acts of courage. The courage to be vulnerable, the courage to admit mistakes, the courage to see people as they truly are, rather than as projections of our own needs and insecurities. Looking back now, as I write this story from the home office of the marketing consultancy that Jessica and I founded together, I'm struck by how much can change when someone finds the courage to speak their truth in a moment of humiliation. That Tuesday morning in the break room, when Jessica's laughter echoed off the walls and our colleagues watched in uncomfortable silence, neither of us could have imagined where that moment would lead. The company we built together, Sterling Martinez Creative Solutions, has become one of Chicago's most respected marketing firms. Our approach, combining authentic relationship building with innovative creative strategies, has attracted clients from across the Midwest and beyond. But more importantly, we've created a workplace culture where people feel valued for who they are, not just for the personas they present. David Sterling, now in his 70s, serves on our board of advisors and frequently tells people that our success story began the day one employee had the courage to define his own worth instead of accepting someone else's assessment of it. He's right, but it's only part of the story. The other part began when someone else had the courage to acknowledge her mistakes and choose growth over pride. Jessica often tells me that my words in the break room that day didn't just save her from making a terrible mistake. They saved her from becoming a person she wouldn't have been able to live with. She says that being forced to examine her own behavior, to confront the difference between confidence and cruelty, between success and character, was the most valuable lesson of her career. But I think the real lesson is simpler than that. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply know your own worth, speak your truth with dignity, and trust that the right people will recognize authenticity when they see it. Sometimes standing up for yourself isn't about fighting back. It's about walking away from situations and people that don't deserve the best of who you are. The break room at Sterling & Associates has been renovated twice since that Tuesday morning, but I'm told that new employees still hear the story of what happened there. It's become part of the company's culture, a reminder that how we treat each other in moments of perceived vulnerability reveals everything about who we really are. And Jessica? She kept the navy blazer she was wearing that day. She says it reminds her of the person she used to be and helps her remember the person she never wants to be again. But I think she keeps it for another reason too. As a reminder that even our worst moments can become the foundation for our best transformations if we have the courage to learn from them. Today, as I watch her through the window of our home office, playing in the backyard with our 2-year-old daughter Emma, I'm reminded that the most beautiful stories often begin with the most painful moments. Emma will grow up knowing that her parents built something beautiful together, but she'll also grow up knowing that it started with a moment of humiliation that became an opportunity for growth. Because that's what I want her to understand, that your worth isn't determined by how others treat you in their worst moments, but by how you choose to respond in yours. That dignity isn't something that can be taken from you. It's something you choose to maintain, regardless of circumstances. And that sometimes the people who hurt us the most can become the people who help us discover who we're truly meant to be. The laughter that echoed through that break room all those years ago has been replaced by different sounds now. The laughter of genuine joy, of shared accomplishments, of two people who discovered that the best relationships are built not on perfection, but on the courage to be imperfect together. So to anyone who's ever been laughed at, dismissed, or made to feel small, remember that their reaction says everything about them and nothing about you. Stand in your truth, speak with dignity, and trust that the right people will see your worth even when others don't. Because sometimes what feels like an ending is actually just the beginning of something beautiful you never could have imagined. And if this story has resonated with you, if it's reminded you of your own worth or inspired you to stand up for yourself with dignity and grace, please hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more stories about finding strength in our most vulnerable moments. Because we all have the power to transform our pain into purpose, our humiliation into growth, and our worst moments into the foundation for our best life. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for reminding me that sometimes the most powerful words we can speak have nothing to do with tearing others down, and everything to do with building ourselves up.